Imagine, just for a second, that you are mindlessly scrolling through your social media feed.
Oh, we all do it.
Right. And you've almost certainly seen this exact image. It's a photo of a friend or maybe some massive celebrity, and they're standing in this pitch black room.
Surrounded by those glowing lights.
Exactly. Thousands of colored lights just reflecting endlessly into the distance.
Mm.
Or maybe you've walked past a high-end Louis Vuitton boutique and seen those incredibly luxurious bags that are just totally covered in these obsessive polka dots.
They really are everywhere.
They are. I mean, they're viral, they look deeply joyful, and they are the signature work of Yayoi Kusama. But what if I told you that the artist behind these incredibly famous, vibrant works of art, like literally the most successful living artist in the world,
Yeah.
has voluntarily lived in a psychiatric hospital since 1977?
It is just a staggering contrast because, you have this art that the modern world consumes as like pure Instagram-friendly joy. And yet the foundation of that entire aesthetic was born out of profound, lifelong psychological struggle.
It really is. And that is what we are diving into today. Our mission with this deep dive is to explore the factual source material about her life. We really want to understand how she took a lifetime of severe trauma, terrifying hallucinations, and frankly, blatant industry theft, and somehow transformed all of that into a global artistic empire.
Because to truly grasp the meaning of those bright, joyful dots, you really have to look at a deeply dark childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start in Japan right around 1929.
Right. So Kusama was born in Matsumoto into a pretty wealthy merchant family. They owned this massive plant nursery and a seed farm.
Which, ironically, is where her famous obsession with pumpkins comes from, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like about 10 years old, she visited a seed harvesting ground with her grandfather. And she was just entirely charmed by what she later called their generous unpretentiousness.
That's such a sweet phrase.
It is. It's this incredibly grounded, innocent starting point.
It is, but unfortunately, innocence in her childhood was extremely sparse because her home environment was just incredibly toxic.
Yeah, her mother was physically abusive.
Yeah, very much so. And she actively discouraged Kusama's interest in art. Like, she would literally snatch drawings away from her mid-stroke.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
Yeah, and it created this frantic, micromanaged rhythm where Kusama felt forced to, rush and finish her art as fast as humanly possible.
Like she was running out of time.
Exactly. It sparked a manic pace of productivity that she basically maintained for the rest of her life.
And the psychological abuse, I mean, it went far beyond just discouraging her hobbies.
Oh, absolutely.
Her father was a serial philanderer, and her mother would actually force the young Kusama to go out into the town and spy on his extramarital affairs.
Which is just, being forced to witness that as a child instilled in her a lifelong, paralyzing fear of sex.
Just a complete phobia.
Right. She later described how a deep contempt for sexuality, particularly the male body, just became permanently ingrained in her psyche.
And right around this same time, at age 10, something else starts happening. Her mind begins to fracture.
Yeah, the hallucinations.
Exactly. She starts experiencing these incredibly vivid, overwhelming hallucinations. We were talking flashes of light, auras, talking flowers.
Just terrifying for a kid.
Completely. She would stare at the floral patterns on a tablecloth, and suddenly those patterns would start multiplying. They would spread to the ceiling, to the windows, up the walls, and then completely engulf her own body.
What's fascinating here is she called this terrifying sensation self-obliteration.
Self-obliteration.
Yeah, a feeling of being entirely reduced to nothingness, just swallowed by the infinite repetition of a pattern.
Wow.
And if that wasn't enough trauma, by the time she was 13, the world was at war. She was sent to work in a Japanese military factory, literally sewing parachutes for World War II.
And the way she described that time is haunting. She spent her adolescence in, quote, closed darkness, just listening to the air raid sirens going off.
Knowing the bombers were right up there.
Right. Knowing that American B-29s were flying overhead. So you have the trauma of the war, the abuse from her mother, the sexual trauma involving her father, and these terrifying, engulfing hallucinations all layering on top of one another.
And, well, all of this converges into a single coping mechanism, which is her art.
Her art.
Yeah. Kusama didn't just choose to paint polka dots because they looked aesthetically pleasing. It was a literal survival tactic.
How so?
Well, those vast fields of dots, which she called infinity nets, they were pulled directly from her hallucinations. By recreating the terrifying patterns herself, she was actively taking control of her trauma.
Wait, I need to pause you there.
Sure.
It sounds almost like a visual panic attack.
Yeah.
Like where the walls are literally closing in on you and you feel completely powerless.
That's a good way to describe it.
But if these visions were so terrifying, why on earth would she intentionally reproduce them on a canvas? That feels like pouring gasoline on a fire. Like, how does leaning into a phobia help her survive?
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but try looking at it through the lens of exposure therapy.
Okay.
Think of it like building a dam. The water, which is the overwhelming hallucination, it's going to rush at her no matter what.
Right, it's out of her control.
Exactly. When the visions just happened to her spontaneously, she was a passive victim being drowned by them. But by taking a brush and painstakingly painting every single dot herself...
She's building the dam.
Yes. She is building the concrete structure that dictates exactly where that water is allowed to go. She becomes the architect of the infinity. She dictates its boundaries and controls the chaos by mass-producing it on her own terms.
Okay, that makes total sense. So she's basically taking the psychological reins.
Exactly.
But eventually she realizes she can't do this in Japan. Like, she describes the society there as too small, too servile, too feudalistic, and she knows she needs to escape to America.
And she actually writes to the famous American painter Georgia O'Keeffe for advice.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And by 1958, she lands in New York City.
Right as the avant-garde and pop art movements are about to just explode.
Perfect timing.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
New York represented freedom, but arriving there didn't bring immediate peace. It actually brought a completely different kind of trauma.
The intellectual theft.
Yes. This is where she encounters rampant intellectual theft.
Yes. So she's in New York, and in the early 60s, she starts creating what she calls soft sculptures.
Right.
And remember that paralyzing fear of sex we talked about? To confront it, she starts taking everyday items, shoes, ladders, a whole couch, and completely covering them with these white sewn phallic protrusions.
It's the exact same mechanism as the dots, replicating the thing that terrifies her, in this case, phallic shapes, over and over again until she has mastered it.
Right. So in 1963, she exhibits this incredibly unique phallus-covered couch at the Green Gallery in New York.
A huge deal.
And in that exact same group show is an artist named Claes Oldenburg. Now, up until this point, Oldenburg had only ever worked in papier-mâché.
Right, no soft sculpture at all.
Exactly. He had never done soft sculpture. But just months after seeing Kusama's couch, Oldenburg suddenly debuts his own sewn soft sculptures.
And he becomes an international superstar.
Yes. The theft was so blatant that Oldenburg's own wife actually pulled Kusama aside and apologized to her.
Which is just awful. And, it didn't stop there.
Of course not.
Shortly after the couch incident, Kusama creates another groundbreaking exhibit. She covers an actual rowboat in her soft sculptures.
Oh, okay.
But then she wallpapers the entire room with repeating mass-produced photographs of that exact boat. It was a completely immersive environment.
Wow.
And Andy Warhol comes to the exhibit, praises it highly, and then, not long after, Warhol famously papers a gallery space with repeating photographs of a cow.
He literally lifted the immersive wallpaper concept.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like a brilliant indie software developer writing the complex code for a totally revolutionary app, only to watch a massive tech giant copy the exact code, slap their own logo on it, and make billions of dollars.
While the original creator gets absolutely nothing.
Exactly. But how did they get away with it so blatantly? Was there no critical pushback at all?
Well, you have to look at the mechanics of the 1960s art world to really understand how this happened.
Okay, lay it out.
The gallery owners, the major critics, the wealthy financial backers, they were all part of a very tight-knit, predominantly white male establishment.
Got it.
Kusama was a Japanese woman operating without that built-in network, without a safety net of capital, and without the implicit pretension of the critical establishment.
So she was an easy target.
Basically. The system was essentially designed to extract value and innovation from outsiders while making sure the financial rewards and historical credit stayed with the insiders.
Because Warhol and Oldenburg had the backing to scale those ideas.
Exactly, and the cultural privilege to be deemed geniuses for them.
And the result for Kusama was devastating. I mean, the complete lack of recognition and the sheer financial ruin drove her to severe depression and suicide attempts.
It was incredibly dark.
And it completely reframes the whole tortured artist trope,
How so?
Well, we always hear these romanticized stories of artists descending into madness because of their innate mental struggles.
Yeah.
But looking at her life in New York, her severe depression wasn't just a byproduct of her childhood hallucinations. It was heavily driven by a profoundly unjust, sexist, and racist industry just breaking her down.
That is such a crucial point. The exclusion was entirely systemic. She was creating work of equal, if not greater, importance than her peers, but she was actively pushed to the absolute margins.
So she's broke, her ideas are being stripped and commercialized by other people, and she realizes she is never going to win by playing by the establishment's rules.
Right.
So what does she do? She takes her concept of self-obliteration completely outside the gallery walls and into the streets.
Which sparks the era of her unauthorized happenings. Like, if the galleries won't give her space, she just claims public space.
I love that.
In the late 1960s, she starts organizing these highly publicized disruptive events in places like Central Park, the Brooklyn Bridge, and even the Museum of Modern Art's Sculpture Garden. She would direct participants to strip completely naked, and then she would paint their bodies with her signature polka dots.
It's fascinating to look back at the historical record of these protests. And strictly from a documentary standpoint, she was incredibly provocative.
Oh, very.
I mean, the source material notes she organized these to protest the Vietnam War. She even wrote an open letter to President Richard Nixon offering to have sex with him if he would stop the war.
Yeah, that happened.
And just to be clear to you listening, we are simply reporting the factual history of her protests as documented in the sources. We aren't endorsing or taking a side on the political activism itself. But regardless of where anyone stands on the politics of that era, the sheer audacity of her approach to public space is undeniable.
The audacity was the entire point. She was forcing the public to confront her work, but perhaps her most famous disruption happened in Italy.
Oh, the Venice Biennale.
Yes, in 1966, she crashed the Venice Biennale, which is essentially, the Olympics of the art world.
Right.
She wasn't invited, but she showed up anyway and installed a piece called Narcissus Garden on a lawn right outside the Italian pavilion. It consisted of hundreds of mirrored spheres just tightly packed together on the grass.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the wild part about this is she doesn't just install the spheres and walk away.
No, she does.
She dresses in a golden kimono, stands right in the middle of them, and starts selling them to people walking by for 1,200 liras each, which was about $2 US.
The organizers were furious.
Oh, I bet. They eventually shut her down, claiming you can't sell art like hot dogs. But I have to ask, was this a fierce, calculated critique of the commodification of the art market, selling art like cheap souvenirs? Or was she just utilizing a brilliant, modern, viral marketing stunt because she was flat broke and needed the cash?
Honestly, it's highly likely it was both. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the artistic mechanism at play here is what changed history. With Narcissus Garden, she was pioneering what we now call participatory art. Think about what a mirrored sphere does. It doesn't just sit there. It reflects its environment.
Oh, right.
It forces the audience to look directly at themselves. The viewer suddenly becomes the subject of the exhibit. You are no longer just passively looking at a painting on a wall. You are integrated into the artwork.
But culturally, the consequences of these massive public stunts were pretty severe for her back home, right? Like, the fallout in Japan was immense.
It really was. Her family was deeply shamed by the nudity and the constant scandals in the international press.
I can imagine.
Her conservative high school actually erased her name from their alumni list. So when she finally returned to Japan in 1973 in very poor health, she was entirely dismissed by the Japanese art world. They literally labeled her a scandal queen.
So she was isolated, physically ill, and deeply depressed.
Yeah.
And in 1977, she found a doctor who used art therapy to treat mental illness. She checked herself into that hospital, and she has voluntarily lived there ever since.
It's incredible.
But the crucial detail is that she never stopped working. She set up a studio just a short distance from the hospital, and she just kept creating. There is a quote from her that really anchors this entire journey. She said, "If it were not for art, I would have killed myself a long time ago."
And for years, she worked in relative obscurity from her hospital room. But then, slowly, the culture began to catch up to her vision.
When did that happen?
The revival really started gaining traction in the late 1980s and 1990s with several major retrospectives. People began to realize the sheer magnitude of her influence. In 1993, she officially represented Japan at the Venice Biennale.
The very same event she had to crash uninvited decades earlier.
Exactly. Talk about coming full circle.
The ultimate vindication.
Yeah.
But the real explosion, the moment she went from an art world legend to a global pop culture phenomenon, happened in the Instagram age.
Oh, completely.
In 2017, her Infinity Mirrors exhibit at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. absolutely shattered records. It was just a cultural frenzy.
The numbers are staggering. Visitors shared 34,000 images of the exhibition to their Instagram accounts.
That's insane.
The hashtag #InfiniteKusama garnered 330 million impressions. The demand was so intense and the rooms were so chaotic that a visitor actually tripped and broke one of her glowing pumpkin sculptures while trying to secure the perfect photo.
And her market value skyrocketed right alongside her cultural value. She collaborated on massive high-fashion lines for Louis Vuitton and Lancôme. Her 1960 painting, White Number 28, sold for $7.1 million at auction.
Making her the most expensive living female artist.
Exactly. Her legacy is undeniably massive, but it's also not without its profound complexities.
Right.
In looking at her complete historical record, we have to acknowledge that her career spans decades of shifting cultural context.
Right.
Like, the source notes that in October 2023, she issued a public apology for racist comments directed at Black people that were found in her past writings.
Which is a very important part of the full picture.
Yes. And again, as hosts, we are impartially reporting this fact to give a complete unbiased picture of the source text. We are just conveying the documented material.
Yeah.
But it's a stark reminder that even artists who endure systemic marginalization can themselves hold and perpetuate harmful prejudices. And understanding her full history means grappling with all those documented realities.
It highlights the deep contradictions in a life lived over nearly a century in the public eye. And returning to the mechanics of her art, there is another fascinating contradiction when we look at how her infinity rooms function in the modern era.
Oh, for sure.
These spaces, these cube-shaped rooms lined with mirrors filled with water, flickering lights, or neon polka dots, they create the illusion of endless space.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox here. We talked about how her original fundamental goal with the mirrors and the dots was self-obliteration.
Right.
The whole point was to completely lose your ego, to surrender your individual identity and just dissolve into the infinite nothingness of the universe. Yet today, millions of people wait in line for hours to step into these exact rooms specifically to take photos of themselves. Have we entirely missed the point of her art by using a tool meant for self-obliteration to actually center ourselves on social media?
It is a profound paradox. But, it all comes back to that core concept of control.
How do you mean?
Remember, Kusama felt absolutely no control in her traumatic childhood, nor when her ideas were being stolen in New York. By creating these highly structured, strictly time-limited infinity rooms, she is finally the one controlling time and space.
Ah, I see.
When you enter her room, whether you are taking a selfie for your personal brand or you are genuinely meditating on the infinite, you are entirely enveloped in her hallucination. You are experiencing her universe, but strictly on her terms. She has mastered the chaos and invited you inside it.
Wow. So she took the very things that terrified her, the multiplying dots, the infinite spaces, the phallic shapes, and she didn't run from them.
Not at all.
She replicated them, obsessively, over and over, until she completely mastered them. She used her trauma not as a crutch, but as a blueprint. And in doing so, she literally forced the entire world to step inside her mind.
Which leaves us with something really fascinating to consider, especially when we look at the overarching philosophy of her life.
What's that?
This raises an important question. The Hirshhorn Museum recently hosted an exhibit of her work titled One with Eternity. That title was pulled directly from that 1968 open letter she wrote to Richard Nixon.
The one about the Vietnam War.
Exactly. In it, she wrote, "Let's forget ourselves and become one with the absolute."
That phrase alone is so countercultural today.
It completely cuts against the grain. I mean, we live in an era where we are constantly obsessed with building our personal brands. We are exhausted by the need to assert our individual identities, to stand out, to constantly shout into the digital void just to be heard.
It's exhausting.
It is. But what if true peace, both mental and global, doesn't come from standing out? What if it actually comes from Kusama's radical idea of self-obliteration? What if real freedom is found in willingly dissolving our egos until we accept that we are just one small equal dot in an infinite universe?
Man, it makes you look at those dark rooms with the glowing lights in a completely different way. It's not just a backdrop for a photo.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to let go. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into her life and work, and we really encourage you to keep exploring these ideas on your own. See you next time.